The Galactic Concord station hung in the darkness of space like a jewel made of light and metal, and Commander Elias Vance stood at the viewport watching transport ships come and go like fireflies against the void. He had arrived 3 days ago, and in those 3 days, he had learned one thing very clearly. Humans did not matter here, not yet, not to the old species who had ruled the stars for thousands of years before Earth had even discovered fire. Elias was a tall man with broad shoulders and tired eyes, and he wore his diplomatic uniform with the kind of quiet dignity that came from years of service. On his left shoulder sat a small patch, worn and faded, showing a single star above 2 crossed rifles. He touched it sometimes without thinking, a habit that had become as natural as breathing. The patch was for her, for Sergeant Una Okonkwo, his best friend, the woman who had thrown herself between him and enemy fire during the First Contact War. She had died so he could live, and Elias carried that weight every single day of his life. He turned away from the viewport and walked through the massive corridors of the station, passing aliens of every shape and size. There were the tall and thin Selvari with their silver skin, the stocky Grun with their 4 arms, and dozens of other species whose names he was still learning. They all looked past him as if he were invisible, as if humans were nothing more than curious animals who had somehow learned to build starships. Elias did not mind their dismissal. He had a job to do, and that job was simple: represent humanity with honor and patience, build connections where he could, and never forget that his species was new to this game. The central plaza of the station was enormous, bigger than any stadium on Earth, and today it was filled with thousands of beings gathered around a raised platform. Elias stopped at the edge of the crowd, curious about what had drawn such attention. On the platform stood a creature unlike any Elias had seen before. He was humanoid but taller, with deep purple skin that seemed to glow from within and eyes like molten gold. His robes were white and flowing, covered in symbols that sparkled like captured starlight. Around his head floated a ring of small lights, and when he moved, the air itself seemed to bend toward him with respect. "Who is that?" Elias asked a nearby Selvari trader. The trader looked at him with shock, as if Elias had just asked what the sun was. "That is High Ascendant Keth Voller," the trader whispered with reverence. "He is a living icon of the Varelian people, 4,000 years old, blessed by the cosmos itself. 12 star systems worship him as a bridge between mortal life and eternal truth. You do not know of him?" Elias shook his head, and the trader made a sound of disbelief before returning his attention to the platform. Keth Voller was speaking now, his voice smooth and deep, carrying across the plaza without any visible amplification. He spoke of unity and purpose, of the Concord's great mission to bring order to the galaxy. The crowd listened with complete attention, many of them bowing their heads when he paused. Elias watched with interest, but also with something else, a quiet unease that he could not quite name. There was something about the way Keth Voller held himself, something in his golden eyes that spoke of absolute certainty in his own importance. Elias had seen that look before, in generals and politicians who believed themselves above consequence. After the speech ended, the crowd began to disperse, but many stayed to seek Keth Voller's blessing. They approached him one by one, kneeling before him while he placed his hands on their heads and spoke words of comfort. Elias noticed that no one questioned him, no one challenged him, no one even looked at him with anything other than complete adoration. "The living icon has guided our people through 3 great wars," another voice said beside him. Elias turned to find a young Varelian standing nearby, shorter than Keth Voller and wearing simple gray robes. Unlike the icon, this one had curious eyes rather than commanding ones. "I am Velthara," the young Varelian said. "I serve as an assistant to the Concord's cultural ministry. You are human, yes? I have not met one of your kind before." "Commander Elias Vance," Elias replied, offering a small bow of his head. Diplomatic attaché for Earth's delegation. Velthara tilted her head with interest. You wear something on your shoulder. A symbol of rank? Elias touched the patch again, that automatic gesture he could never quite stop. No, he said quietly. It is a memorial for someone I lost. Velthara's expression changed, becoming confused and slightly uncomfortable. A memorial for the dead, she asked. Forgive me, but I do not understand. Among the Vorelian people, we do not honor those who have fallen. Death is... She paused, searching for the right words. Death is failure. To die is to prove that one was not strong enough, not blessed enough. We remember only the living, for they are the ones who matter. Elias felt something cold move through his chest, but he kept his face calm. Humans see it differently, he said. We believe that how someone dies can be as important as how they lived. My friend died saving others, saving me. That sacrifice is worth remembering. Velthara nodded slowly, though it was clear she did not truly understand. A strange custom, she said without malice. But I suppose young species have many strange customs. Perhaps in time you will learn the wisdom of focusing on the living. She excused herself and walked away, leaving Elias alone in the thinning crowd. He looked back at the platform where Keth Voller still stood, surrounded by admirers. The living icon glanced in his direction for just a moment, and their eyes met. Keth Vollar's golden gaze passed over Elias with complete indifference, the way one might look at an insect on a windowsill. Then the icon turned away, returning his attention to those who actually mattered. Elias stood there for a long moment, his hand resting on the worn patch that bore Yuna's memory. He thought about her laugh, her courage, the way she had smiled at him one last time before pushing him out of the way of the blast. I will make them remember you, he whispered to no one. I promise. Then he turned and walked away, just another invisible human in a station full of ancient powers and living gods. But invisibility, Elias knew, could be a weapon too, and humans had always been very good at being underestimated. The grand hall of the Conquered glittered like the inside of a treasure chest, with lights floating in the air and music playing from instruments that had no visible players. Tonight was the celebration of the Concord's 500th anniversary, and every important being in the galaxy had gathered to honor this moment. Elias stood near the edge of the hall, holding a glass of something blue that tasted like honey and electricity. He wore his formal uniform, cleaned and pressed, with the memorial patch still visible on his shoulder. Several other human delegates stood nearby, all of them looking just as uncomfortable as he felt. Try to make connections, Ambassador Chen had told him before the gala. Smile, nod, and do not cause any problems. Elias had followed those orders for 3 hours now, smiling at beings who looked through him and nodding at conversations he was not invited to join. He was tired, his feet hurt, and he wanted nothing more than to return to his quarters and sleep. But then the crowd shifted, and suddenly High Ascendant Keth Vollar was walking in his direction. The living icon moved through the gala like a king through his court, with admirers parting before him and closing behind him like water. His golden eyes scanned the room with casual ownership, as if everything and everyone in it belonged to him. Those eyes landed on Elias, and this time, they did not pass over him. Keth Voller stopped directly in front of the human, and the nearby conversations fell silent. Dozens of aliens turned to watch, curious about what had caught the icon's attention. You are the human, Keth Voller said, his voice like music made of ice. I noticed you watching me in the plaza, and now I see you here, wearing that curious little decoration on your shoulder. What is it? Elias felt every eye in the vicinity lock onto him. His throat was dry, but he kept his voice steady. It is a memorial patch, High Ascendant. It honors a fallen soldier, my friend Sergeant Yuna Okonkwo. She died during humanity's first contact war. Kethvalar tilted his head, and a small smile played at the corners of his mouth. A memorial, he repeated, tasting the word. For someone who died. How curious. Tell me, human, why would you wear a symbol of failure on your body for all to see? The cold feeling returned to Elias's chest, stronger this time. She did not fail, High Ascendant, he said carefully. She gave her life to save others. Among humans, we consider that the highest form of courage. Kethvalar's smile grew wider, and something cruel flickered in his golden eyes. He turned to address the watching crowd, spreading his arms in a gesture of amused disbelief. "Do you hear this?" he called out, his voice carrying across the hall. "The humans memorialize their garbage. They take those who were too weak to survive and lift them up as heroes." He laughed, and several beings in the crowd laughed with him. How quaint! How absolutely precious! He turned back to Elias, leaning closer, and his voice dropped to something almost intimate, but still loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Your friend failed to survive, little human. That is the only truth that matters. She was not strong enough, not blessed enough, not worthy enough to continue living." Why would you worship such weakness? Why would you cling to the rotting dead like vermin picking at bones? The silence that followed was absolute. Even the floating music seemed to fade. Elias stood completely still. His face showed nothing, no anger, no hurt, no shame. But inside his chest, something very old and very dangerous began to wake up. "Would you like to repeat that?" he asked, and his voice was so calm it could have frozen fire. Keth Voller blinked, surprised by the lack of reaction. He had expected tears, perhaps, or anger, or the satisfying sight of a lesser being breaking under his words. Instead, he found only stillness. This annoyed him. "I said," Keth Voller continued, his voice rising, "that your dead friend was nothing, a forgotten failure, a piece of garbage that the universe correctly threw away. She is gone. Human, rotting somewhere in the cold dark, remembered only by creatures too primitive to understand that death is the ultimate proof of worthlessness." Still, Elias did not move. Still, his face remained blank. The crowd watched with growing unease. Some of them had seen humans before, had done business with them, or fought beside them. They knew that human stillness was not the same as human submission. But Keth Voller did not know this. He had never dealt with humans, had never learned to read their faces or understand their silences. He saw only a small creature refusing to give him the reaction he wanted. "Nothing to say?" the icon mocked. "Of course not. What could a mayfly say to a star? Go back to your little world, human. Take your pathetic memories with you, and be grateful that I allowed you to stand in my presence." Elias nodded once, very slowly. "Thank you for your words, High Ascendant," he said, and his voice was perfectly polite. "I will remember them." Then he turned and walked away, his steps measured and unhurried. The crowd parted for him, and whispers followed in his wake. Most assumed he was retreating in shame, fleeing from the icon's righteous condemnation. A few looked thoughtful, remembering stories they had heard about humans, stories about patience and planning and revenge served very, very cold. Keth Voller watched the human leave with satisfaction. He had put the creature in its place, had reminded everyone present of the natural order of things. He turned back to his admirers, already forgetting the encounter. But Velthara, the young Vorelian from the plaza, watched Elias go with something close to fear in her eyes. She had studied humans as part of her cultural ministry duties, had read reports about their history and their wars. She knew what human silence meant. It did not mean surrender. It did not mean acceptance. Human silence meant that somewhere behind those calm eyes, a plan was forming, a plan that might take days or weeks or years to complete, but would be executed with absolute precision. Humans did not roar and charge like the warrior species. They did not challenge their enemies to immediate combat like the honor-bound races. Humans remembered. Humans waited. Humans built their vengeance brick by brick until it was a fortress that could crush mountains. Velthara looked at Keth Voller, laughing and glowing among his admirers, and she felt a chill run down her spine. The living icon had no idea what he had just started. Outside the grand hall, Elias stood alone in a quiet corridor. His hands were shaking now, trembling with a fury he had not allowed himself to show. He leaned against the wall and closed his eyes, and Yuna's face appeared in his mind. Her smile, her courage, her final words. "I have got you, Eli. Go. Live. I will make him pay," Elias whispered to her ghost. "I will make the whole galaxy remember your name, and they will forget his. I swear it." Then he pushed off the wall and walked toward his quarters, already making plans. The human way had begun. Elias did not sleep that night, or the night after, or the night after that. He sat in his small quarters aboard the Concorde station, surrounded by floating screens filled with data and documents and histories. His eyes burned from staring at text, and his coffee had gone cold hours ago, but he did not stop working. This was the human way, not rage, not violence, but preparation. Careful, patient, relentless preparation. On the first day, he reached out to every human contact he had across the galaxy. Traders, engineers, soldiers, journalists, diplomats, anyone who might have information or connections. His messages were simple and direct. "I need everything you can find on High Ascendant Keth Voller of the Vorelian people." The responses came slowly at first, then faster as word spread through human networks. Humans took care of their own, and when one of them had been publicly humiliated, the others closed ranks like wolves protecting a wounded packmate. "Found something interesting in the Outer Rim archives," wrote a human historian named Dr. Sarah Chen. "The Vorelians had a major war about 3,000 years ago. Records are incomplete, but there are hints of a scandal involving a high-ranking officer who abandoned his troops. Name was redacted, but the timing matches Keth Voller's early career." Elias marked the file and kept searching. On the second day, he began reaching out to other species, carefully, quietly, choosing his targets with precision. He spoke with traders who had dealt with the Vorelians, diplomats who had negotiated with them, scholars who had studied their culture. What he found surprised him. Keth Voller was not universally beloved. Behind the worship and the ceremony, there were whispers, old grievances, forgotten insults, moments when the living icon had shown his true nature to those he considered beneath him. A Selvari merchant told Elias about a trade negotiation where Keth Voller had mocked their entire species as silver-skinned scavengers. A Grun military commander shared a story about the icon dismissing their honored war dead as failures who deserved their fate. A dozen other species had similar tales, all carefully buried, all kept silent out of fear of Vorelian power. Elias recorded everything. On the third day, he found what he was looking for. Deep in the archives of a neutral observation post, buried under layers of encryption that took human hackers 12 hours to break, there was a file. It was old, over 3,000 years old, but it was complete. During the War of Crimson Stars, a young Vorelian officer named Keth Voller had commanded a battalion defending a vital supply station. When the enemy attacked in overwhelming numbers, Keth Voller had ordered a retreat, but only for himself and his personal guard. He had left 2,000 soldiers behind to die, sacrificing them to cover his escape. The survivors had tried to report his cowardice, but Keth Voller's family was powerful, and his political connections were vast. The witnesses were silenced, some through bribes, others through threats, a few through convenient accidents. The records were sealed, the scandal was buried, and HFY continued his rise to power. Over the following centuries, he had built his legend carefully, presenting himself as a chosen being of wisdom and light. No one remembered the coward who had abandoned his troops. Everyone knew only the living icon. Until now. Elias stared at the evidence on his screen, and a cold smile crossed his face. "You called her garbage," he said to the image of HFY floating before him. "You called her a failure, but she died saving others while you lived by letting others die for you. Let us see how the galaxy judges that." He was not finished yet. While building his case against HFY, Elias also reached out to Earth, to Yuna's family, her former unit, the military historians who had documented her service. He asked them to share her story, her real story, with anyone who would listen. Yuna Okonkwo had not just saved Elias. During the First Contact War, she had single-handedly held a defensive position for 6 hours, while 300 civilians evacuated a colony under attack. She had been wounded twice, but refused to fall back. When enemy forces finally broke through, she had detonated her own position rather than let them reach the evacuation ships. She had died a hero, and now that story began to spread across human networks and beyond. Veterans shared her name with pride. News outlets picked up the tale. Her image, young, strong, smiling in her uniform, appeared on screens across human space. Within days, Yuna Okonkwo was no longer a forgotten soldier. She was becoming a symbol of human courage and sacrifice. All the while, HFY remained ignorant of the storm gathering around him. He held his courts and received his worshippers, confident in his status as a living icon. He had already forgotten the human from the gala, had dismissed the encounter as a minor amusement. Why would he think about it? What could a primitive species barely out of its cradle possibly do to threaten a being who had been worshipped for 4,000 years? This was his great mistake. He did not understand humans. He did not know that they were the species that had invented the long game, that had spent generations building cathedrals they would never see completed, that had chased enemies across oceans and decades until justice was served. Humans did not forgive insults. They simply waited until the moment was right, until every piece was in place, until their enemy was standing on a trap door that would open beneath their feet. On the morning of the 4th day, Elias compiled his evidence into a single file. It contained HFY's war crimes, his history of insults against other species, recordings from the gala, and testimonies from beings across the galaxy who had suffered his arrogance in silence. He sent copies to trusted allies and prepared his formal request to address the Concord Assembly. That afternoon, he received confirmation. His request had been granted. He would speak before the full assembly the following day on a matter of cultural clarification. Elias allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Then he returned to work, reviewing his presentation one final time, making sure every word was perfect. He thought of Yuna, of her sacrifice, of the way HFY had spat on her memory. "Almost there," he whispered. "Just hold on a little longer. Tomorrow, the living icon would learn what happened when you mocked a human's dead. Tomorrow, the galaxy would witness the fall of a god. And tomorrow, Yuna Okonkwo's name would begin its journey toward immortality, not despite HFY's insults, but because of them. This was the human way. They did not destroy their enemies with fire and fury. They destroyed them with patience, with truth, and with the unshakable certainty that memory was the most powerful weapon in the universe." Elias closed his screens and finally allowed himself to sleep, and in his dreams, Yuna smiled at him and told him she was proud. The Concord Assembly Hall was the largest enclosed space Elias had ever seen, a vast dome that could hold 10,000 beings from across the galaxy. Today it was nearly full, with representatives from hundreds of species arranged in rising tiers that curved upward toward a ceiling painted with stars. At the center of the hall stood a single platform, and on that platform stood Elias Vance, one human, alone, facing the collected power of galactic civilization. High Ascendant Keth Voller sat in the place of honor among the Vorelian delegation, his golden eyes watching with mild curiosity. He had heard that the human had requested time to speak on a matter of cultural clarification, but he had thought nothing of it. What could a human possibly have to say that would interest this assembly? He was about to find out. "Honored representatives of the Galactic Concord," Elias began, his voice amplified to fill the enormous space. "I come before you today not to complain, not to demand, but to clarify. 4 days ago, at the anniversary gala, High Ascendant Keth Voller spoke publicly about human customs regarding our dead. He called our practice of honoring fallen heroes primitive, called those heroes garbage, and declared that death is proof of worthlessness." A murmur ran through the assembly. Many had heard about the encounter, but few had paid much attention to it. "I am not here to argue philosophy," Elias continued. "Different species have different beliefs, and that is natural. What I am here to do is provide context, to help this assembly understand what the High Ascendant's words reveal about his own character, and to share the truth that has been hidden for 3,000 years. Keth Voller's eyes narrowed. This was not what he had expected. Elias touched a control, and a holographic display appeared in the air above him. Documents, images, recordings, all floating in a constellation of evidence. "The High Ascendant believes that death is failure," Elias said. "That those who die have proven themselves unworthy. Let us examine what his own actions say about worthiness." He highlighted a section of documents, and they expanded for all to see. During the War of Crimson Stars, the being now known as High Ascendant Keth Voller commanded a battalion at the siege of Velarin Station. When enemy forces attacked, he ordered a retreat, but only for himself and his personal guard. He abandoned 2,000 of his own soldiers to die, using their lives to cover his escape. Gasps echoed through the chamber. The Vorelian delegation sat frozen in shock. "This is a lie!" Keth Voller rose from his seat, his face twisted with fury. "This human speaks falsehood. I demand—" "I have the original records," Elias interrupted calmly. "Sealed by your family 3,000 years ago, but now unsealed. I have testimony from the descendants of survivors, passed down through generations. I have communications logs, battle reports, and witness statements. Every piece of evidence has been verified by neutral parties and is available for examination." He let that sink in, then continued. "The High Ascendant declared that my friend, Sergeant Yuna Okonkwo, was garbage because she died. Let me tell you how she died." A new image appeared. Yuna in her uniform, young and strong, her eyes full of determination. "Sergeant Okonkwo held a defensive position alone for 6 hours while 300 civilians evacuated from an enemy attack. She was wounded twice, but refused to retreat. When the enemy broke through, she detonated her position rather than let them reach the evacuation ships. Every single civilian survived because of her sacrifice." Elias paused, letting his words fill the silence. "The High Ascendant abandoned 2,000 soldiers to save himself. Sergeant Okonkwo died saving 300 strangers. Which of these, I ask this assembly, is the failure?" The chamber erupted in noise, shouts, questions, demands for order. Keth Voller was on his feet, his golden glow flickering wildly, but his voice was lost in the chaos. Elias waited for the noise to die down, then continued. "But that is not all. The High Ascendant has made a habit of insulting the honored dead of many species represented in this hall. I have collected testimony from beings across the galaxy." He played recording after recording, Keth Voller dismissing Selvari ancestors as silver-skinned thieves, mocking the Grun war heroes as muscle without minds, sneering at the memorial traditions of a dozen different peoples. With each recording, more delegations rose in anger. With each insult revealed, Keth Volar's allies grew fewer. Finally, Elias reached the end of his presentation. "Among humans," he said quietly, "we have a saying. You can judge a civilization by how it treats the dead. We honor those who sacrifice themselves for others because their deaths give meaning to our lives. We remember them because they deserve to be remembered." He looked directly at Keth Volar, and his voice carried clearly across the hall. "Sergeant Una Okonkwo gave her life so that others could live. High Ascendant Keth Volar let others die so that he could live. I leave it to this assembly to decide which is the failure, which deserves to be honored, and which deserves to be forgotten." Then he stepped back from the platform and stood in silence. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Delegations that had long feared Varelian influence now stood to condemn Keth Volar. Species that had swallowed their anger for centuries finally had permission to speak. The Selvari demanded an apology. The Grun called for an official investigation. A dozen other peoples added their voices to the rising storm. The Varelian delegation itself began to fracture. Younger members distanced themselves from their icon, while elders argued frantically among themselves. The system of worship that had sustained Keth Volar for millennia was cracking before their eyes. Keth Volar stood in the middle of the chaos, his golden light dimming, his face showing something that no one had ever seen there before: fear. He tried to speak, tried to defend himself, but no one was listening anymore. The living icon had become just another voice in the crowd, drowned out by the weight of his own sins finally catching up to him. The Speaker of the Assembly called for order and announced that a formal inquiry would be launched into the evidence presented. Pending the results, High Ascendant Keth Volar's status as a recognized spiritual leader would be suspended. As guards escorted Keth Volar from the chamber, he passed close to where Elias stood. Their eyes met, and for the first time, the ancient being truly looked at the human. What he saw there was not hatred, not triumph, not even satisfaction. He saw only calm. The calm of a man who had done what he came to do, who had kept a promise to someone he loved, who had turned grief into justice. "You are finished," Keth Volar hissed. Elias shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "I am just beginning. And you are going to watch what happens next. You are going to watch her name rise while yours falls. You are going to live long enough to see the galaxy remember her and forget you. That is the human way, High Ascendant. We do not kill our enemies, we make them watch." Then he turned away and walked out of the chamber, leaving the fallen god to contemplate his future. Outside, the galaxy was already changing, and Una Okonkwo's name was beginning its journey toward the stars. The observation deck of the Concord station was empty at this hour, and Elias stood alone before the vast window, watching the stars burn in the endless dark. His reflection stared back at him, tired eyes, lined face, the weight of 4 sleepless days visible in every feature. But there was peace there too, the peace of a promise kept. Behind him, the door whispered open, and soft footsteps approached. He did not turn around. He already knew who it was. "Commander Vance," said Velthara, the young Varelian he had met in the plaza what felt like a lifetime ago. "May I speak with you?" Elias nodded without looking away from the stars. Velthara came to stand beside him, her reflection joining his in the window. She looked shaken, confused, like someone whose entire world had been turned upside down. "I do not understand," she said quietly. "Keth Volar was everything to my people, a living icon, blessed by the cosmos, and now—" She struggled to find words. "Now the elders say his title will be stripped, his temples will be closed, his name will be removed from our histories. He will be nothing." "He will be what he always was," Elias replied. "The truth does not change what a person is. It only reveals it." Velthara shook her head. But why did you not simply challenge him? Other species would have demanded combat, would have sought immediate satisfaction for the insult. You waited. You gathered evidence. You built a case like a patient hunter. Elias finished for her. Like someone who wanted to win, not just fight. He finally turned to face her, and his eyes were kind despite everything. Do you know why humans honor our dead, Velthara? It is not because we are primitive or sentimental. It is because we understand something that many species do not. The dead still have power. Their stories can inspire the living. Their sacrifices can shape the future. Their names can echo through centuries long after those who mocked them have been forgotten. He looked back at the stars. Keth Voller could have killed me in that gala. He is 4,000 years old, and I am just one human. If I had attacked him in rage, his guards would have struck me down, and nothing would have changed. He would still be a living icon, and Yuna would still be a forgotten soldier. His voice softened. But by waiting, by building my case, by letting him believe he had won, I took everything from him. Not just his title, but his legacy. Now, when beings think of Keth Voller, they will not remember a blessed sage. They will remember a coward who abandoned his soldiers and mocked the heroes of other species. That memory will outlast any death I could have given him. Velthara was silent for a long moment. And your friend? She asked finally. Sergeant Okonkwo? What happens to her memory now? Elias smiled, a real smile, warm and full of love. Look outside, he said, pointing toward the distant lights of passing ships. Right now, across human space and beyond, her story is being told. Military academies are adding her sacrifice to their teaching materials. Veterans are raising glasses to her name. Children are learning about the soldier who gave everything so that strangers could live. His voice caught slightly, but he continued. Next month, the Concord Council will vote on naming their newest space station. 3 species have already proposed naming it after her, not just humans, but others who were moved by her story. By next year, there will be scholarships in her name, monuments bearing her image, songs sung in her honor. He touched the worn patch on his shoulder. Keth Voller wanted her to be forgotten garbage. Instead, she will be remembered forever. And every time someone speaks her name, they will also remember what he said about her, and what it revealed about him. Velthara stared at him with something new in her eyes. Not just respect, but something deeper. Fear, perhaps, or awe. Your species is terrifying, she whispered. You do not simply defeat your enemies. You make them watch their own destruction year after year, while those they tried to diminish rise higher and higher. Elias shrugged. We are what our history made us. Humans learned long ago that the loudest warrior is not always the most dangerous. Sometimes the quiet ones, the patient ones, the ones who remember everything. They are the ones who change the world. He turned away from the window. I should go. There is still much to do, and I have a promise to keep. But Velthara stopped him with a question. Commander, did you know? When you stood there in the gala listening to him insult your friend, did you already know what you would do? Elias paused at the door. No, he admitted. In that moment, I only knew that I would not let it stand. The plan came later, piece by piece, as I worked through the night. But the commitment, the certainty that I would find a way, that was instant. That is what humans do. We decide something matters, and then we make it happen, no matter how long it takes. He smiled one last time. Remember that, Velthara. Remember it the next time someone tells you that humans are young and weak and primitive. We may not live as long as your people, but we have learned to make every year count. And we have learned that death is not the end, only a different kind of beginning. Then he was gone, walking down the corridor toward whatever came next. Velthara stood alone at the window, looking at the stars, thinking about everything she had witnessed. She would remember this. She would remember the human who had dismantled a 4,000-year-old legend with nothing but truth and patience. She would remember the soldier named Yuna Okonkwo, who had died a hero and been reborn as a symbol. And she would remember the lesson that the human had taught her, that memory was the most powerful weapon in the universe, and that those who controlled memory controlled everything. Centuries later, students across the galaxy would learn about this moment. They would study the fall of High Ascendant Kethvalar in their history classes and discuss what it meant in their philosophy lectures. And they would learn the name of the human who had brought him down and the name of the soldier whose honor he had defended. Keth Voller lived on for another 800 years, but he lived in obscurity and shame, a cautionary tale told to children about the price of arrogance. His statues were melted down, his temples were converted to other uses. His name became a curse word meaning false pride. But the Okonkwo station grew into one of the largest and most important hubs in the galaxy, a beacon of cooperation between species. And in its central plaza stood a statue of a human soldier, young, strong, smiling, her arms open in welcome. Beneath the statue, carved in 100 different languages, were the words that humans had chosen for her memorial. She gave her life so that others could live, and in giving, she became immortal. The humans had kept their promise. They always did.